we're all contaminated.
We made baby bottles with it. We made their formula. Like, that's what we did.
When I take a shower, I am showering in contaminated water, that we are bathing and cooking and cleaning in contaminated water.
All of these North Carolinians are talking about the toxic chemicals found in their water.
Now that water coming out right there is contaminated.
I don't think people realize how screwed up this situation is.
I'm tired of, to be honest, watching friends fight cancer.
You shouldn't have to worry that your water at your home is making your family sick. That it's unacceptable.
The chemicals were dumped into their water supply by a plant in North Carolina.
Chemistry powers today.
Good thing it's Teflon.
At Chemours, we care.
Owned by Chemours, a subsidiary of DuPont.
It infuriated all of us to learn that Chemours had been dumping this chemical compound into our Cape Fear River for decades.
Cape Fear provides drinking water for hundreds of thousands of North Carolinians in the southeastern part of the state.
We should not have to live this way. And it's all because of them and what they done.
President Trump promised to make sweeping changes, and the first 2 weeks have been filled with a flurry of executive orders. I mean, just look at the picture here from last Tuesday. All those executive orders spread across his desk like one of those restaurants that give you too many menus. Tonight, we're going to focus on just one of those orders, though, that has a big, broad effect, particularly on our drinking water. So maybe you've seen the headlines. They've been everywhere today. Trump's halting of EPA limits on PFAS in drinking water, a tragic setback. Trump withdraws Biden administration plan to set discharge limits on PFAS in water. So they're talking about the limits on the companies that produce and dump cancer-causing chemicals into our waterways. And this halt on those limits is really just a small part of a much broader order that's impacting pretty much all federal government departments and agencies. So the order actually says this, quote, do not propose or issue any rule until a department or agency head appointed by the president reviews and approves the rule. So the administration calls it a regulatory freeze pending review. And it's one of a few freezes Trump has put in place. He ordered a hiring freeze of federal employees, you may remember. Today, he ordered a freeze on many federal grants and loans, although a federal judge did block that this afternoon. Essentially, he's trying to stop everything that the last administration was doing until he can get his people in place. It's simply a pause in most cases, but not with PFAS standards, because technically, the Biden administration never fully enacted it. So those rules for companies will go away entirely. The EPA withdrew the proposal. It's over. If you want it back, the new administration, the new head of the EPA, would have to start from scratch. Now, this is a big deal because PFAS can cause cancer. And it's all over North Carolina. Each one of the dots on this map is a place in our state where the chemical was found in the water that people drink and bathe with and wash their produce with.
If you're like me, you probably gain some sense of comfort when looking at an ingredient list like this. It gives me clarity on what I'm about to consume, and even when I don't recognize a particular ingredient, I can rest assured that it's been rigorously tested, that all of these ingredients are safe. Well, that's what I used to think. In the US, ingredients of questionable safety end up in our food supply constantly, thanks to a legal loophole.
In 1958, Congress passed this law called the Food Additives Amendment, and it basically broke up ingredients into two categories.
The first category is food additives. Think artificial flavors that the FDA has to explicitly approve. The second is this generally recognized as safe or GRAS category.
The idea was to allow ingredients that were already in the food supply to remain in the food supply, salt, pepper, things like that, and not have to have companies prove their safety.
GRAS substances can be novel substances found in the environment, processed foods. They can also be entirely synthetic chemicals. That's part of the problem.
Through this GRAS categorization, companies don't need FDA approval to put basic, time-tested ingredients like garlic into their jarred tomato sauce, for instance.
As part of the definition of food additives, a company has to go through a rigorous review, FDA approval, and the chemical is approved in its regulations. When companies found that that was too burdensome, they noticed that in the statute there was an exemption if a chemical was considered generally recognized as safe. And they decided, really starting in the 1990s, that they could make those decisions without ever telling FDA.
Terra flour was allowed in things like smoothies and leek crumbles through this GRAS exemption. And as terrible as 39 people having to get their gallbladders removed is, it's maybe one of the least concerning things I learned about GRAS ingredients. When a company wants to add some new GRAS ingredient to their product, whether that be Terra flour or something made in the lab, the FDA allows companies to determine, independently, if it's safe. That's it. The FDA requires companies to provide tangible data to prove these ingredients are safe.
There has to be something published. However, publication, companies can put it on their website and count that as publication.
To be clear, this data needs to be published, but not through any kind of publication that employs peer review. This data and safety determination ultimately gets reviewed by what's called a GRAS panel, but it's not as independent as it sounds.
The research has shown that 100% of the GRAS panels are people with conflicts of interest, financial conflicts of interest. 100%.
There's not one person.
There was not one person.
The guy who did that research, Tom Neltner.
What we found is that 7 individuals served on 46% of those panels. Their whole career is deciding that something is or is not GRAS. What we know is that the scientists that ask the tough questions, the scientists who are critical of the process, they don't get asked to be serving on expert panels because the system is biased to give the company the answers it wants.
Companies might want to use new, non-FDA vetted ingredients because they'll make their product taste good, like trans fats, or because it's a cheaper alternative to an existing ingredient. Or maybe it stops your peanut butter from getting that unsightly layer of oil on top. And the easiest way to get those ingredients into new food formulations is through the GRAS loophole.
Do we know how many items are entering the food supply like that?
We don't know. One study found decades ago that 1,000 chemicals entered the food supply over a 20-year period.
Okay, so that's one route. Now you told me there's another route. There's a tell the FDA version of this story?
There's a tell the FDA version of the story.
That other version, Jennifer tells me, is when companies still conduct their own studies. But they ask the FDA to review them. They do this because an FDA stamp of approval gives their product extra credibility, which honestly sounds great.
The FDA then can either say, we don't question the safety determination, go ahead and use it, or they can say, actually, we don't agree with your conclusion, and they ask for more data. Here's where the problem is. The company can then just say, you know what, cease and desist, we don't want you to keep reviewing this, and then they could go to market anyway.
I want to pause this to make this clear. The FDA can say, whoa, 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 your numbers are wrong, your product might make people sick, and the company can say, whatever. Pretend this never happened, and we're gonna sell it anyway.
About 1 in every 6 gets pulled back by the company because they don't want to get a letter that says, this is not GRAS.
You as a researcher, are you able to look at an ingredient list and have the tools to determine if this is one of those ingredients that the FDA looked at and said was not safe or was never submitted to the FDA at all?
No, no one has that tool. So the food labels do not help us in this question.
Terra flour is a dramatic example, and relative to other additives, easy to catch. A bunch of young people with liver problems ending up in the ER gets noticed fast. But the thing that really frightens me is when an ingredient's harmful effect could take years to discover. Trans fats, those were GRAS.
Paper after paper found increased heart disease risk from this industrial trans fat. And then 30 years later, the FDA said, you know what, you're right, industrial trans fat should be removed from the food supply. And only in 2023 was it actually finally removed.
So what happens is once these things get into our food supply, we wait for the evidence to be overwhelming. I think the number was 26,000 people a year were dying from those trans fats.
Tom tells me the FDA does have the explicit authority to monitor the health effects of ingredients as we're exposed to them over time. Ingredients that could cause cancer or other issues, but only after years of exposure. The FDA just doesn't exercise that authority.
The system is rigged towards ignorance. You do just enough to be able to determine that it's safe. Just enough to get it through FDA review. Just enough to have a hand-picked team of experts that you picked, that you pay, who will agree.
Welcome to Forward Farm. The site, which presents itself as an avant-garde agriculture centre, is run by Bayer, the pesticides giant. At just half an hour's drive from Brussels, it's ideally located for lobbying.
Chemicals, it's very difficult to understand. Almost every month, products disappearing from the market.
We start with a detailed presentation of the benefits of agrochemical products.
They are really useful to come to a sustainable crop production. What we have seen, in fact, in the last 50 years, we were able, with new technologies, to produce the same amount of food on 68% less land.
Yet over the past 20 years, the European Union has banned the use of hundreds of pesticides on its soil. Producers keep having to seek alternatives. Here, for example, they're wondering how to replace CIPC, a chemical that used to be used to stop potatoes from sprouting.
We see that the legislation is having different interpretations in different parts of the world, because the same products are still allowed, for example, in Japan or Canada or the US. So it's the way our legislation in Europe is looking at it, which is very careful, which is always trying to be at the very, very safe side, and is using very much the precautionary principle. So making sure that if we are not 100% sure that we can avoid every risk, we are not going to allow it.
Yet these strict rules do not prevent the EU's producers of pesticides from exporting their products outside the bloc. It's legal, though a little hard to justify.
It's not like it's not regulated. These products, they have to be also declared to the legal authorities if you're exporting them. So it's not that a country can export what they want without declaring this. They have to declare what, when, and to which country. So it's a fully transparent process to do this. But it's not easy to explain.
The transparency of the process is regulated from Helsinki in Finland by the European Chemicals Agency. Here, exports of products that are banned in the EU are assessed and authorised by a team led by Rémi Lefebvre.
The purpose is to provide information about this or that substance or mixture, its properties, and then also the rules governing this substance in Europe.
In short, they produce a document informing the destination country of why the product is banned in the EU. And then the product is shipped off to the US, Brazil, Ukraine, Morocco, and elsewhere. According to a recent study, 80,000 tons of banned pesticides were exported from the EU in 2018.
The main destination countries for banned pesticides that are made in Europe are also the main countries from which Europe imports agricultural and food products. So this means that these pesticides come back into the EU in the form of residues in these foodstuffs that European consumers then find on their plates.